Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Obviously, top story. If you go to the InfoMullet, this is the article on there, Et tu COVID. The White House has gotten hit and hit pretty hard. And I wanted to, there's been a lot of coverage. This isn't like new, but what I try and do with the InfoMullet is provide a little more context to help people understand. And if we think about like, last Friday and Saturday, there's all this, well, maybe it's fake or maybe he's just trying to get out of the debate. And I'm like, I don't think so. Because I was looking at, I've done a lot of COVID coverage. And, these things, there's a timing factor. When there's potential super spreader events, you may have one or two positives early on, but that number is going to rapidly increase. And I said, look, on Friday, if this thing's going to be high by the weekend in positive cases and the types of people who are getting infected, I don't think this is a fake event at all. And it has since spread and it continues to spread. And now what we're at is, well, I'll go ahead and I'll share this diagram because I want to kind of, hopefully this will help people with the context. So this chart is kind of like a placemat, right, to help understand what's going on, because there's a lot of implications. This COVID outbreak at the White House touches on a lot of things. At the top here, these are the 4 spreading events that have been identified. You have the September 26 Barrett nomination. This was they call it a Rose Garden ceremony, but we need to be very clear that there were activities and receptions before and after that were inside. So it wasn't that this was just an outside event. And as you've seen the pictures, I've got some of them up on the InfoMullet. Not a lot of face masks, not a lot of social distancing. This is believed to be the super spreader event. So they're kind of targeting. They don't know who brought it in. They haven't done the contact tracing to figure out. It could have been several people, but a super spreader event happens when you have someone who has a very high viral load intersects with an event that has the circumstances of a lot of people, no social distancing and close proximity. And even though all the pictures are of the outside event, it's probably more likely that the spreading happened at the inside events, the receptions and things like that, where it was indoors. Obviously, following right on the heels of the Rose Garden ceremony to nominate Supreme Court nominee Barrett was the presidential debate in preparation. So people who were at the Rose Garden ceremony were also getting ready for the debate. Then we have a Gold Star family event, a reception. Gold Star family members, for those who don't know, are members who have lost loved ones in the services. And so this was a regular event that the White House does, sort of a reception for Gold Star families, but it happened right in this context when there's an active outbreak spread. And then we have the Minnesota fundraiser that was attended on September 30th. Even though Hope Hicks had, I think, already declared herself positive, and there was strong suspicion, or there's a question of who knew what when, but there's a real question of whether this fundraiser was a good idea to hold. So these are the spreading events. And as you go down, it filters through with the White House. And this is important to understand from the context, because once you have an outbreak at the White House is like, COVID loves the White House. It's cramped corridors, people working in tight locations, not a whole lot of safety protocols in place. And it spread from there very quickly in what I'm calling wave 1 of this event. So just in the first week, we're up to about 40 positives right now. There are 10 positives in the White House directly. This is the president, the first lady, the president's body man, Nick Luna, a valet, some of the staff, two residential staff. These 10 positives are in the White House residential staff and active staff as well. And from here, the White House is a nexus of intersection for a lot of things. And so these color codings at the bottom, I'm going to touch on them. It has national security implications, national government implications, presidential campaign implications, and U.S. Senate. So from the White House, and I'm not drawing lines because it's not clear. The White House has these positives, and then you have 3 White House military staff. This was the U.S. Coast Guard aide to the president, and the president's valet is a military personnel. They both got positive. And then there was a vice commandant of the Coast Guard, an Admiral Charles Ray. He was positive, but he attended this Gold Star family event. So it's not clear whether he got it from the Gold Star family reception or from some contact with the Coast Guard aide. The problem is he was the primary means of transferring it to the risk to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The vice commandant attended a meeting on Friday morning in the tank. That's that, you ever see it in movies, it's the closed room where everyone is making the decisions for the missions and all that. That's the tank. He was in that room with all the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now they have tested negative, but out of an abundance of caution, they have self-isolated. So the first thing that we got to talk about is in one blow, you've taken the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's not that they're online. I want to be careful here. Continuity of government, the DoD has built in a lot of redundancy, but you've certainly degraded the capability when you have to take these Joint Chiefs, and they're all working remotely. This is the Army Chief of Staff, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Commandant, even Space Force. Space Force got hit, right? We just stood up Space Force, and their first campaign ribbon is going to be a White House seal with a COVID symbol on it for this. You know, they're all self-isolating except for the Marine Commandant, who's in his office doing push-ups to push this back. No positive test yet in the Joint Chiefs, but the national security here is these Joint Chiefs of Staff, each into themselves, is like a little mini White House. These interact with lots of people all the time. So there's a risk of spread now at the Pentagon, but the good news is the DoD takes this very seriously. They have lots of protocols in place to ensure that if there is a COVID outbreak, it gets contained. They practice all the safe practices. You say they're self-isolating even though they're testing negatives. That was the problem is with these super spreader events. They were just testing negative, but they weren't, you know, a negative test alone isn't sufficient. So the DoD is doing the right thing by isolating the Joint Chiefs, but there's the national security implication. Now we move into continuity of government. And first of all, the president is still the president. He hasn't transferred power. There's been no invocation in the 25th. He got out of the hospital. I think he's still under effectively hospital observation in the White House. They've got a lot of capabilities there. They've got a lot of infrastructure. It's not impossible for him to be still receiving what would be the equivalent of a moderate treatment in the White House. And of course, you know, he's active on Twitter. But two of the senior advisors to the president, Hope Hicks and Stephen Miller, have both tested positive, and now they're isolating. These senior advisors, they don't have statutory roles, but they are very key in forming government policy, directing actions, and making sure that the president's directives are carried out. So this is a hit to national government. Again, continuity of government. I'm not saying the nuclear codes are in jeopardy or we don't have a functioning government, but it's certainly degraded because not only are they, these senior advisors, positive, but two other senior advisors whose names you might find familiar are negative but isolating. And that's Jared Kushner, who is in charge of the coronavirus response. He's isolating now, even though he's negative, he's in quarantine. And Ivanka Trump, who does something, I think, but she's isolating too. And because Trump relies on his family to fill these advisory roles, that's a hit to the national government. The president's ability to effectively manage the government has taken a big hit. But wait, there's more. The press office, the people we would be going to ask questions, like the press secretary, the principal assistant press secretary, and the assistant to the principal press secretary, all positive, all quarantined. Goodbye. 3 media journalists, unfortunately, they were exposed too. So the entire apparatus, not, you know, you can debate the validity and the utility of the press secretary office under any presidents. It's obviously there for the support of the president, but they're working remotely too. So the national government has taken a big hit. And then we switch over to the presidential campaign. This was my focus on Friday because in the presidential campaign, you have 10 positives now, starting with the campaign chairman himself. The head of the president's campaign is positive and isolating. Then you've got 9 or so people who were involved in debate preparation, the most senior of which is Chris Christie. Chris Christie is now hospitalized. He's under observation in a hospital. A lot of these folks were at the Barrett nomination. That's why they think this is a super spreader event. But a campaign office, you go up to Arlington, Virginia, where this office is, they're working elbow to elbow and just crammed in there. And they're not practicing the good measures because Trump himself isn't modeling it. So not surprising to see it spread. The presidential campaign was taken offline over the weekend as they had to clean the headquarters out. I mean, Pence is out there campaigning and stuff like that, but there's a hit here. The Republican National Committee, the chairwoman, Ronna McDonnell, I think, also tested positive. She's self-isolating. So you've got a hit to the presidential campaign. And finally, last but definitely not least, the U.S. Senate. Because this is the Supreme Court Justice nomination event that was the super spreader event, most of the Republicans, I think 4 Republicans on the Judiciary Committee were at this event, and they got it. And so let's start with the Judiciary Committee. There are 2 positives on the Judiciary Committee, 2 Republican senators. They're now in quarantine. They're self-isolating. The committee hearings are scheduled for October 12th. That is feasibly, if they recover, that could continue to go forward. But here's where it gets interesting. Senate rules are that you can't vote by proxy just because. Like the House has put in place a lot of COVID rules for proxy voting. In the Senate, however, the current rule is you can only vote by proxy if it doesn't affect the outcome. So if it's a 60 to 40 vote and you want to throw in, you know, your number 60, they'll let you vote by proxy. But if it would change the outcome, you don't get to do a proxy vote. And why that is a big debate, but those are the Senate rules. Well, the Judiciary Committee is normally a 12-10 split between Republicans and Democrats. Right now, with 2 senators quarantining and the proxy vote rules, it's a 10-10 split, which means if the vote came up today for Barrett's confirmation, they couldn't pass her out of the Judiciary Committee. They couldn't move her forward. Again, there's time for this to resolve itself as long as no more senators within the Judiciary Committee get positive and have to quarantine. Senator Graham's already said he's going to go ahead with the hearings. They can certainly start the hearings. They can hold it, but they're in a quandary when it comes to any procedural motions during the hearing. If they've only got a 10-10 split of effective votes on the floor and they can't bring in those proxy votes, they may want to wait, delaying it until they can bring these senators back in, you know, healthy presumably, and get those votes. Those 2 plus 1 more on the Republican side in the Senate have tested positive, plus an additional senator who was exposed to these is testing negative, but self-isolating. So the Senate on the floor, the GOP has a 53-47 majority. They're now down to 49, something like that, 49-47 majority on the floor. So if a floor vote happened, remember those proxy rules, you can only vote if it wouldn't change the outcome. Now, that's still enough Republican majority, and there's not many people who are willing to vote against the Supreme Court, but you can see how narrow this margin is becoming. And I think McConnell noticed this or saw this coming down the pipe because he made a very unusual announcement on Monday, which is that he was going to yank the Senate into what's called pro forma sessions. So the Senate's official business is closed. What they're doing is having pro forma session. It's a skeletal staff. Most of the Senate's out of the building. They just have someone go up and read a 30-second thing that makes them officially in session, so they're not in vacancy, because if the Senate's in vacancy, that has constitutional implications for appointments. But they're in pro forma. That's going to prevent votes happening that might go against the Republicans. Now, that's not going to keep the Judiciary Committee from holding its hearings. They can continue to hold their hearings even in pro forma sessions, but it shows to you the bind that this has caused to Senate. You've got the stimulus bill, whether it's going to be Trump wants it to go forward or not. Those negotiations still happening. You have the Supreme Court nomination. And the challenge for McConnell is if he loses 1 or 2 more senators, he doesn't have enough people to change the rules to make the proxy votes looser, as the Democrats were advising all along. So this is just a really big mess. And the final thing with the Senate is at least one of these senators, Tom Tillis, who is positive, is in a pretty tight race in North Carolina. He's 3 to 4 points behind. He needed this last month to catch up. Now he's sidelined off of the campaign and can't campaign. And you're talking a Senate race that is going to come down to the wire. If they lose Tom Tillis and they lose Susan Collins, and, you know, I think South Carolina's a bit out, you could see a flip of the Senate, and it could come down to senators who can't campaign because of this COVID outbreak. And this affects fundraising. You know, the president's not out there doing fundraising. The money's not coming in. They're already behind. This has a huge implication. And all of this is just wave 1. These are all infections that probably came originally from any of these original events and just detected in this first week. Last week, before anyone quarantined or self-isolated, all of these people were moving around exposing other people, which means we're going to get a second wave of infections probably beginning this Friday through next week, which are the second round of people who are affected by these people. And if we've got 40 now, you could probably reasonably say somewhere between 100 to 150 all told when it's done. Now, that may be mainly staffers or things like that, but that shows the impact of this, and it just continues to expand. I've got this article I keep updating with the you know, with the latest thing, and it just keeps growing and growing. So these are the implications of this White House COVID outbreak. It's pretty major. Let me go back to some questions here. See what there's are. Okay. Yeah. Jerry Spalding's bringing up Rudy Giuliani wasn't looking good on the news the other night. He had a coughing fit. I'm trying to be careful of not getting ahead of the confirmations, and I'm staying focused on those. Like Rudy Giuliani obviously has an impact on the presidential campaign, but, you know, Kellyanne Conway got infected. She's an advisor to the president, but sort of informal. She's definitely a spokesperson, but her daughter got it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. There's going to be family implications to this and people getting it. But the real crux is at the time they needed it most, the lackadaisical attitude of this White House has come back to sort of betray itself, which is why I titled this Et tu COVID, right? You know, they didn't take it seriously. They didn't put in place the protocols. And now they've had the feared outbreak event that is spreading, and we'll see where it goes. Krista's asking, how odds that they'll bring in a senator who's positive just to get the votes? That's a good question. I think they have timing. So the Senate is all about timing, right? There's a bazillion rules for delaying and taking longer and slowing things down in the Senate. I think someone like McConnell, a tactician like him, someone like Reid when he was in the Democrats' Senate Majority Leader, these are parliamentarians. I think as long as they have time, they're not going to push risking more because let's face it, the senatorial demographic is old. You don't want to risk, if you're a senator, you're going to be looking at your fellow senators who are positive and being like, that could be me. And there's a high chance if you lose a senator to death, all of a sudden you don't have any vote. So I think they're going to use time and try and manage this in time. They're right now they're playing space for time. They're basically saying, all right, the hearings start the 12th of October. We put the Senate in pro forma. Our planned vote is the 22nd, I think, or 29th is when McConnell plans to vote. That gives them a few weeks for people to go out, get through their illnesses, come back. But I think they're underplaying the round two that I'm talking about. We'll see how much of round two hits the Senate. My guess is there's staffers, there's chief of staffs, and probably at least a few more senators who are going to get caught in round two. And if that's the case, that timetable may be off. And what they're trying to do is they're balancing this. There's the election day results. If there's an overwhelming win for Biden, the Senate's going to be in a real tough spot to pass Barrett under those conditions because they know it's going to, especially if the Senate flips, they know it's just going to be undone. So I think they're going to try and do it before the November election, but after everyone gets back. So they have a little time to play with. But if round two happens and we see a few more senators get positive where their start date is this week coming up, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, Carrie is saying, don't believe in science, science don't care. As I said in the article, 2020 ain't here to play. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.